on, guys? It's your boy Luke here for our DFS core picks for this week's Valero Texas Open. A little bit of a change of pace after last week's match play, which in truth was a lot of fun. There was definitely a lot of good matches down the stretch, particularly during the elimination bracket, and for Scottie Scheffler to ascend the whole way to world number one. Now that was pretty nice to see. So now we head over to Texas, another really nice venue. It's got plenty of undulation to it, a lot of strategy involved with getting your way around TPC San Antonio, but in general, also a stronger than average field for this year's Valero. Usually this is the tournament before the Masters, and you will have a handful of players that come over that try and prepare themselves for the conditions at Augusta National. There's no surprise that TPC San Antonio is the host for the tournament before the Masters. They do have quite a few striking resemblances, but this year we do have quite a few high-profile guys like Rory McIlroy, Jordan Spieth, Tony Finau, Ricky Fowler, just to name a few heading over for this year's Valero. So excited to hop into the picks here. In this video, we'll be covering my top 6 core picks for DFS contests this weekend. Using my data-driven approach, these are going to be my favorite play in each price range that I'll be building a lot of my lineups around. And that doesn't mean that they're locks, but they are going to be plays that I'm significantly leveraged to the field on, whether that ends up being in the 25 to 35% range. That's going to be my target for these large field GPPs. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into the picks here for this week's Valero Texas Open. Alright, on the screen you can see the projections for this week. Of course, as always, you can access these at my Patreon page. Just $1 for the month gets you access to all of these spreadsheets as they update throughout the week. There'll of course be ownership involved, the complete player pool added to these sheets, and also access to the Gsluke Discord server. So highly recommend you go ahead and check that out. But as always with these previews, going to go ahead and start off with a quick key stat review. The stats that we're looking for in trying to identify players this week. At the top we have shots gained approach, which is never going to be a surprise. It is always going to be number one in my modeling. This week, perhaps it's quite notable that we have a balanced profile. Pretty much every single proximity bucket will be utilized to rate around the tour average, so not really anything that we're honing in on too much. A few stats that we are honing in on, though, would be driving distance. You can see it's a 15% weighting in my modeling. Same thing with around the green play. You have some raised surfaces here at TPC San Antonio, which make getting up and down extremely difficult. You're also dealing with, even though it's not a super long golf course, some extremely difficult holes. Those mostly being the par 3s, which are averaging over 200 yards per hole, and also the par 5s, which average over 600 yards per hole. In fact, the quote-unquote easiest of those par 5s is nearly 580 yards. So difficult there. It's difficult to get up and down. In terms of the putting surfaces, we do have a little bit of a unique situation. Usually are Bermuda grass surfaces, but this year we do have the GCSAA telling us that it is going to be a POA trivalous overseed. No mention of the dormant layer of Bermuda grass, which we saw over there at Austin Country Club. There was no green to be seen on those green surfaces, and that's because a lot of that Bermuda grass, which needs plenty of water, plenty of hydration to live, hasn't been getting it that time of year. And even with the irrigation networks that they have at these golf courses, which of course are extremely elaborate, it's going to be difficult to sustain a type of grass like Bermuda grass, which needs that type of moisture. So down in Florida, they were getting away with it, but over here in Texas, you are seeing that POA be the dominant surface. Also taking a look at overseed putting, we've been dealing with this situation for the last 5 to 6 weeks, but like I said before, in Florida, they got away with it a little bit more. You saw some of that grain on those surfaces there, so it was a little bit more of a true Bermuda grass / POA Anua surface, but now that we're over here in Texas, a little bit more of a POA dominant surface. Also be looking at driving accuracy. Par 5 scoring is always something that differentiates players at this course. Of course, with those 600-yard par 5s, that's not surprising. There's plenty of bunkers here, so we're looking at sand saves. Green regulation percentage is a good way to keep yourself out of a lot of the trouble here. Like I said before, you're dealing with raised green surfaces with plenty of undulation that are hard to get up and down at, and perhaps the best way to just keep your score low is to keep yourself out of those greens. And then par 3 scoring and 3-putt avoidance are also a few things that I'm sprinkling in. But now that we have the key stats out of the way, let's go ahead and cover our top plays for this week. And our spend up option, our 10K plus golfer for this week, is going to be Rory McIlroy at $11,200. And he really is starting to look like his old self. It's quite nice to see. We obviously saw him win Wells Fargo last year at Quail Hollow. He ended up winning over there towards the beginning of this season there at the CJ Cup. But in general, Rory McIlroy is starting to round into form, and particularly with his ball striking. It was that putting that was carrying him there in the fall swing. It's why he ended up winning over there at the CJ Cup. But now that we've gone into 2022, it's that Rory McIlroy patented ball striking that's starting to come around. Last time we saw him at the Players' Championship, he gained over 2.5 strokes off the tee, on approach, and around the green. The only real bugaboo for him is he lost plenty of strokes with the flat stick, which, like I said before, had been carrying him for many of the months preceding that golf tournament. So for that to be the reason he didn't go out there and light up the golf tournament was a little bit disappointing, to say the least. If we take a look at the last 24 measured rounds for Rory, they've been excellent. He's gaining in every category but the putter, which, again, a lot of that is due to the Players' Championship. Also, a few of the other events here to start 2022, but gaining significantly around the green, gaining significantly on approach. He's the longest player in this field, and it's not even close. And I guess you could say Bryson DeChambeau would be the longest player, but dealing with the hip injury, dealing with the wrist injury, Rory McIlroy is more than likely going to be out driving him. So he's dealing with the biggest advantage off the tee. He's been a very solid player over these last 24 measured rounds. It just gives you an idea of how good of a putter he was before this recent stretch of golf. I mean, look at this, gaining 0.42 shots gained putting per round over his last 50 measured rounds. And of course, that includes 24 measured rounds of him being a negative putter. So just keep in mind that he's been insane with that putter over that stretch. So to expect him to return to that type of form is something that is going to happen over the next event or two. And if he continues this ball striking that he's had over these last 3 or 4 events, he's very live to go out there and win this event, not just by a stroke or two, but by 3 or 4 strokes. We've seen Rory McIlroy do that in the past, and we're starting to see that same type of competitive spirit come out from him as well. So I'm really looking forward to it. In terms of recent form, just to give you an idea, again, didn't play at the match play, didn't play at Corrales, which was probably a good idea to take a little bit of time off. Also wasn't there at Valspar, but 33rd at Players, even with the horrible putter, 13th at API, and 10th at the Genesis, right? So he's been putting up these performances that haven't been all that flashy, but all he's got to do is put together all 4 of those categories. He's had 3 out of the 4 for most of these events. He had 3 out of the 4 at the Players. It's just that the putter was that bad that he ended up finishing in 33rd place. But that's his floor at this point. He's going to bring all 4 of those tools to an event here in the next event or two, like I said, and he's going to win that event. Now, he's never played here at this event before. You can see he has no history going back to 2016, which is slightly concerning, especially considering that pretty much every other player up top has had experience here. But we've also seen first-time champions at this event before. So it's something that happens every once in a while. You can see Jordan Spieth won it in his second trip here. Same thing with Corey Connors. He won it on his second trip here. But we've also had people win this event in their first time here. So it's something that's happened before. Not a reason that I'm going to exclude an elite player like Rory McIlroy from my pool. So even though he's likely to be the most chalky player on this slate, I would expect him to be in that 24 to 25% projected owned range. Still going to be somebody that I'm getting leverage on for the field. Next up, we're going to be talking about Maverick Mcnealy. He's my quote-unquote second man in here, my 9K plus golfer that I'm targeting. He's somebody who's kind of going under the radar, and I'm not sure why. At the match play, he was one of the best players in the field. If you look at some of the unofficial shots gained metrics, pretty much any source that you look at for their calculations, he's near the top. If you take a look at Draftkings scoring, of course, he won so many holes during group play that he ended up being one of the highest scoring players on the slate, period. In fact, he outscored some of the people that made it to the Elite 8. So he had a very solid week. If we take a look at the recent finishes for Maverick Mcnealy, they've also been pretty solid, right? 17th in the match play. Like I said, he just didn't make it out of group play, was part of the group that ended up losing in that Sun Death playoff. He finished 46th of the Players, 73rd at the API, so at least made the cut, top 10 at the Genesis Invitational. And if you guys saw my comp courses video, you guys will know that the Genesis Invitational is one of my favorite comp courses. It's a similar length, actually a little bit longer than what we have here at TPC San Antonio, but you're dealing with a similar lack of water hazards off the tee. You're also dealing with a ton of undulation and an extremely hard golf course to get up and down at. So there's plenty of similarities between Riviera Country Club and what we're going to see this week. So to see him finish in the top 10 there is definitely a boost to his ranking. Much like Rory McIlroy, this is the first time that Maverick Mcnealy will be playing this event, which shouldn't be a surprise given the fact that he's so early in his PGA Tour career. But what's really making him stand out is his all-around game. He's typically a very solid around-the-green player, so the fact that he's losing slightly to the field over his last 24 measured rounds isn't something that I'm going to hold against him too much. He's typically a lot better than that, but the off-the-tee play has been there. The approach play has been right up on average, which for McNealy, he's right about what we would expect. He's definitely not going to outshine a ton of his peers in that category. He's right about tour average, and that's okay when you have the absolutely magic broomstick. He's gaining over 3/4 of a stroke per round with the flat stick, which, again, that's elite for this field. You're not going to see that very often. And even when players have these spike performances, you're not going to see them average 3/4 of each stroke per round over the last 24 measured rounds. That's a pretty sizable sample size. If we take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, right, give them a little bit more time there, the off the tee play gets even better. The approach play goes to a positive. You can see he's closer to a neutral player around the green, and the putter still gaining 4/10 of each stroke per round. So this isn't something that's just happened overnight. This isn't something where Scotty Scheffler just ascended to world number one out of nowhere. McNealy has been a solid player for quite some time. In fact, the last time that he made it into this 9K range, he ended up being like 28% owned. You guys remember he was a fade here in the channel, and he ended up finishing like 35th place that week. Ended up burning a lot of people, so I wouldn't be surprised if he comes in lower owned than he should be. This is a fair price for Maverick Mcnealy. In terms of the putting numbers, he's great on Poa Nua, gaining nearly 3/4 of a stroke per round, which again is very close to what he's been doing over these last 24 measured rounds. In terms of total model rank, he's top 15 in the field, top 17 with recent form, top 15 with TPC San Antonio fit, just checking all of the boxes for us this week. So we'll have to keep an eye on ownership. Even if he's chalky, that's not going to keep me off of him. I just think that he's such a well-rounded play for this golf course that no matter where he comes in with the ownership, he will be somebody I have leverage on, but hoping he comes in that like 10 to 12% range. That'd be pretty solid for us. Next, let's talk about our bread and butter play. And you can see there's two plays extremely close in pricing here, but we're going to go ahead and call our bread and butter play the 8K plus golfer. And our value pick, which we'll talk about here in a second, Pan Desire, is usually a guy in that like $8,000 to $7,600 range. And of course, this is at the top of the range, but I absolutely love both of these plays here. Let's go ahead and start off with Mito Pereira, though, at $8,100. If you've been following the channel here, if you've been on the Patreon, Discord, that type of thing, you know I absolutely love Mito Pereira. This guy is a very interesting golfer to track, especially in terms of his shots gained metrics, because kind of like Rory McIlroy, he either has the ball striking or he has that magical putter, and it's just going to come to the golf tournament when he can marry those two assets. He's going to run away with an event. So I've been talking about Mito Pereira potentially having a win over the last like 2 to 3 months now. He's been making cuts over the last month. Go ahead and take a look at his recent form. You can see he has a 27th at the Valspar. He didn't play at the match play, which again was probably a good thing. That's a lot of golf to play if you end up making the cut. Miscut at the Players, he had the rad end of the draw, so we're not going to hold that against him, but 30th at the Honda, 15th at the Genesis, that's really solid for that strong of a field. And before that, especially during the fall swing, there were a few top fives, plenty of top 25 finishes mixed in there, and not many missed cuts. He's been strikingly consistent with his finishes, even though his shots gained metrics have been completely wacky. So let's go ahead and dive into what I'm talking about here. So for Mito Pereira, you can see he's back to gaining with the ball striking, which of course is what we thought he was going to be when he came onto tour, right? Gaining nearly 1/4 of a stroke per round off the tee, gaining nearly half a stroke per round on approach. The putter now has returned to right around a tour average putter, which is what we expected when Mito Pereira came onto tour. Everyone that had been a Corn Ferry Tour enthusiast that had seen Mito Pereira in his prime down there, getting that battleground promotion, told us that he was an insane ball striker, one of the longest players you're ever going to see, and that the putter was going to pop from time to time. And that's what we've seen over the last 24 measured rounds. Now, over the last 50 measured rounds, which is why this guy is just extremely hard to read, is he's still gaining a ton of strokes on approach, still gaining a ton of strokes off the tee. The iron, the green plays a little bit better, but the putting is right around neutral. So this guy is consistently going to be right around a neutral putter, but if you break it down by golf tournament, it'll be negative 5.5 shots gained putting. It'll be plus 4.5 shots gained putting. So if you dice it up by a 12 or let's say even like a 16 round sample size, that guy will go from being one of the best putters on the PGA Tour to one of the worst putters on the PGA Tour. In fact, pretty much every single week when we check in with these putting stats of Mito Pereira, it ends up looking something different. So now the fact that we're back to a neutral rate means that he's going to go heavily one way or the other over the next 2 or 3 events. That's what we've seen from Mito Pereira. And if we can catch him on one of these hot streaks with that flat stick, he's definitely got it with the ball striking. And that's why he's top 2 in TPC San Antonio fit. He's one of the best players in the world from tee to green. In terms of recent form ranking, even though he doesn't have a ton of flashy starts, not any top 5s, any wins, anything like that, he's still top 10 in recent form rank because of how consistent that he's been playing. And on Poa Nua, even though it is a relatively small sample size, right around 20 measured rounds for Mito, he's gaining over each stroke per round on these surfaces. So perhaps it's the Poa Nua that gets him into that type of mindset where you can go out there and gain those 4 to 5 strokes on the field putting in that week. The fact that he's done it on this surface in the past, the fact that he's trending towards getting to that type of performance sometime here soon, makes me absolutely love him as a bread and butter play this week. I'm going to have him in that 30, maybe even 35% exposure range this week. Somebody who, even if he's coming in that 8 to 9% projected ownership range, I'm going to have a ton of leverage on. This is somebody, like I said, that has that upside. He won 3 times on the Korn Ferry Tour just to get his card. He's the only person out of everyone that is a rookie on tour this year that earned their card that way. And of course, wins on the Korn Ferry Tour, we've seen that equate to wins on the PGA Tour. Just look at Chad Ramey last week, somebody that was a prolific Korn Ferry Tour player. Finally broke through on the PGA Tour. So it's going to happen for Mito Pereira at some point, and I'll be backing him in every single tournament until he does so. Next up, we're going to talk about our value play, which, again, at $8,000, might be a little bit more expensive than most weeks, but we're going to make it work because I absolutely love him this week at the Valero Texas Open. He comes in top 5 in recent form ranking, which would surprise many of you out there, but he's been putting up some really solid golf over his last 3 to 4 events. A TPC San Antonio event, so a little bit more of a long-term approach. He's still top 26 in the field, almost top 25, which gives him an 11th place ranking out of every player in the field in terms of his modeling, which is a little bit surprising, especially given the Poa Nua numbers. That is included with plenty of these metrics over there, but that's just how good the ball striking has been. If we take a look at the last 24 measured rounds for a Patton Kizzire, you can see he's gaining nearly 3/4 of each stroke per round on approach. That's one of the best numbers in the entire field. The off the tee play hasn't been all that consistent, right? He's been a little bit wild with the accuracy there, but he is one of the longer players on tour. If you guys have seen Patton Kizzire, he gets it out there 310, 315 yards on the regular, and at a very dry golf course with plenty of rollout, he's going to hit the ball even further in that 325 to 330 range. And while he won't be among the elite in terms of distance here, he definitely has more than enough firepower to get it done. One thing he also does well is the around green play. He's always one of the better putters on the PGA Tour, and in general, he's done a lot of his best work over here in Texas. Not just at this golf course, he only has 1 start over here at the Valero Texas Open. In fact, last year he finished in 9th place, so if you're going to have 1 start at an event, it's better hope that it's a top 10 like we have with Patton Kizzire, but he's also finished in the top 5 multiple times at the Houston Open. He has a few decent finishes as well at a few other Texas tracks that we play from time to time, like TPC, Craig Ranch, all that sort of fun stuff. And in general, Patton Kizzire, he has the skill set that we're looking for. Like I said, around the green play, more than serviceable for a Patton Kizzire. Approach play, one of the best players in the field. He's more than long enough off the tee, and if there's one thing you can get away with at this golf course, it is that driving accuracy. You have plenty of room off the tee from the fairway until the trees, about 15 to 20 yards on average. So unless you're just absolutely sprinting it out there, you should be all right. You're also dealing with rough that isn't all that penal. In fact, one of the easiest roughs to hit out of in all of the PGA Tour. So for Patton Kizzire, if he's going to get away with that driving accuracy, he can lead into that approach play. That tee to green play we know is going to be immaculate for Patton. He starts to make some putts on Poa Nua, which might be a lot to ask for, right? For his career, he's not been the best putter on these surfaces, but he's done some decent work in Texas before, so perhaps he's able to shake some of those woes that we've seen over the last year or so on Poa Nua and put up a really solid performance. Either way, though, even if he doesn't, if he putts to a field average this week, is very likely to finish in that top 25, potentially even the top 15 if he has some of his best stuff tee to green, and in a DFS format, that would be more than enough for us. Next, moving on to, we're going to call it our diamond in the rough this week. That's going to be a guy in that $7,000 to maybe $6,800 range, which is a little bit cheaper, a little bit overlooked down the board. Matt Jones is somebody I also expect to be relatively low owned this week, so you can get plenty of leverage with your ownership here. But in terms of skill set fit, Matt Jones also has exactly what we're looking for. I'd say him and Patton Kizzire have very similar skill sets, both sneaking long off the tee, both going to be in that top 50 in terms of driving distance. They're both also extremely well-rounded players. Now, Matt Jones might not be as prolific on approach as somebody like Patton Kizzire, particularly over the last 24 measured rounds, but around the green, Matt Jones is one of the best players in the world, and putting, he's solid no matter the surface, right? On Bermuda grass, he's one of the best putters in the world. But even on Poa Nua, which is statistically his worst surface on tour, still gains nearly a quarter of a stroke per round. So the short game with Matt Jones is always going to be something he can lean on. The off the tee distance is again something that's sneaky for Matt Jones. He doesn't usually get credit for being one of the longer hitters, but he's certainly among the elite in this field. You don't have a lot of those elite drivers in this field outside of Rory McIlroy and Bryson DeChambeau. And if we take a look at the course history, I believe he hasn't played this event before. I just want to confirm that, though. He has played the event. He finished 13th in 2017, 60th, miscut 30th. So he hasn't really asserted himself in either direction at this course. I guess that's what I was thinking on there, but the recent form is really why he's priced where he's at, and it hasn't been all that pretty, but let's go ahead and look at it, right? Miscut at the Players, that was a long time ago. He also had the wrong side of the draw there. 52nd at the API, that was a tough golf course, really tough conditions, right? 52nd a made cut, you're not going to hold that against him. Miscut at the Honda, he was defending champion, a lot of weird stuff goes on with defending champions, and then 15th at the Genesis, and like I said before, with Maverick McNealy, some of these guys that have had success at the Genesis, that is one of my best comp courses, one of the courses I'm taking the most seriously when doing comps, because it has very severe greens, hard to get up and down there. It's also relatively long. That played into Matt Jones' skill set there. This course is the exact same type of profile. So if any of the recent form is going to be good, I'm glad that that was at the Genesis Invitational. And just because he's missed 2 of his last 3 cuts, I'm not going to overreact to that. Again, one of those was the Players' Championship. The other one was the Honda Classic when he was defending his crown. And like I said before, a lot of weird stuff happens when you're defending your champion. So if he can return to just his career averages, I would expect him to at the very least go out there and make the cut this week, which for somebody at $7,000, that's not really enough to pay it off, but I also think he has that top end upside. It's going to come down to the approach play. He's very inconsistent with the irons, but when he has his best stuff, he is capable of going out there and gaining 4, 5, even 6 strokes on approach like what we saw this year at the Tournament of Champions. That's why he almost ended up winning that golf tournament, got it well past 25 under par. When he has that part of his game, he's almost unstoppable. So in GPP formats, I really like his upside for this week. And also at just $7,000, does give you plenty of salary flexibility. And now lastly, for our flyer pick, this is going to be a pick in the lower 6K range that might be higher upside, might be extremely risky as what we have here with Patrick Rodgers, but at the same time, you're going to get plenty of salary flexibility, and also is also somebody that might have that top 10 upside, right? I'm not just going to pick anybody down low. Patrick Rodgers is somebody who, when he has his best stuff, is capable of scaring the top of this leaderboard. And first and foremost, he's a Poa Nua monster. We know that. Pretty much anytime we get over on the West Coast, he's somebody that we're taking a look at. But this week with the Poa dominant surface, he's also going to be in play. And if we take a look at the recent form, you'll just get an idea of why people aren't playing him, right? Miscut at the Corrales, miscut at the Players. He had the bad part of the draw there. So you gotta give him a little bit of a break. But 38th at the API isn't all that bad. 64th at the Honda isn't all that bad. Miscut at the Genesis. So it's 3 out of his last 5 missed cuts, which isn't all that great. That's why people are giving him a lot of crap. And most notably over there at the Corrales Punta Cana Championship, he ended up missing the cut and burning a ton of people. He was like 25% owned. So I would expect him to come in relatively low owned this week, maybe in the 1.5 to 1.8% owned range. And also he's coming in at a very solid price, right? $6,600. And now I know to miss the cut at an alternate field event where there's only 120 players over there in the Dominican Republic isn't a really solid look, but hear me out here. If we take a look at the last 24 measured rounds, you'll see it's been a little bit shaky, but even with that shaky golf, he's been putting up some solid numbers, so still gaining on approach, still gaining around the green, still gaining with the putter. The only part of his game where he's losing is off the tee, which he ended up hitting a ton of water balls at the Players' Championship, so that's going to happen. But one thing we know about Patrick Rodgers is he's long off the tee. If we take a look at his last 50 measured rounds, get an idea of what he's been doing for more of a long-term sample size. Let's see, where is he at? He's $6,800. Actually, $6,600. That's why I couldn't see him. There he is. You'll see that on tour with his driving distance, he's number 33 on tour, so that's solid. And again, these are tour numbers, not just for the field. So in the field, I'm sure he'd be top 20 in terms of driving distance. He's been gaining off the not gaining off the tee, gaining with the putter, gaining around the green. The approach play has been right around in neutral and still losing with the off the tee. So he's a little bit inconsistent, can definitely deal with accuracy issues. But like you just saw, he's 33rd in driving distance. And And at this venue specifically, there's little to no penalty for hitting it in the rough. And also, it's very difficult to get the ball to these tree-lined fairways. So you should be able to get the ball out there, just bomb and gouge it, lean into that around the green play where he's one of the best players in the world, or at the very least serviceable, one of the best putters on Poanua that we've ever seen. And given the fact that he's coming in off the miscut, no one's going to want to play him. He's going to come in with that super low ownership. If he just flips the approach play, this guy could finish in the top 5 or top 10 very easily. We've seen that at the Bermuda Championship. This guy almost won that event. He had a few other top 10s at that time of the year as well. Just really comes down to that iron play. So I'll be taking a shot on Patrick Rodgers. He's far from a safe play at the Valero Texas Open, but somebody who could certainly turn it around and post a really solid performance. That is all I've got for this week's core picks. Before we go on and get out of here, go ahead and let me know in the comments who you guys think is going to win this week. For me, it's going to be Rory McIlroy. If I had to take somebody a little bit further down the board, let's go ahead with Maverick Mcnealy. But both of them bombers, really solid around the green, have the complete games I'm looking for, and more importantly, have the long irons, right? They're going to be able to take advantage of those long par 5s that are over 600 yards, those long par 3s. So those are the two that I'll go with. Make sure to go ahead and let me know down in the comments who you'll be taking. As always, going to have even more content dropping throughout the week, guys. So look forward to our value picks dropping later on this evening, our fades and sleepers dropping tomorrow, our prize picks content, showdown content, back to regular scheduled programming this week with showdown contests back for the main contests. So a lot to look forward to. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of that to come. Make sure you smash the like button if you haven't already before you get out of here. Good luck with all of your lineups for this week, guys, and let's get this cash.